Excuse me, I couldn't help noticing that strange and interesting plant. What is it?
Let's take a look back at Little Shop of Horrors, which is a 1986 American black comedy musical film directed by Frank Oz. Yes, Yoda himself. It is, of course, a film adaptation of the off-Broadway musical by composer Alan Menken and writer Howard Ashman. We follow meek flower shop assistant Seymour, played by Rick Moranis, who pines for his co-worker Audrey, played by Ellen Greene, but she has a boyfriend, Orin, played by Steve Martin. During a total eclipse, he discovers an unusual plant he names Audrey 2, which feeds only on human flesh and blood. The growing plant attracts a great deal of business for the previously struggling store. The genesis of Little Shop of Horrors actually has its history beyond the off-Broadway musical, as this was itself based on a 1960 Roger Corman directed movie called The Little Shop of Horrors, which is a black comedic horror farce film and not a musical at all. Corman's movie was based on a 1932 short story by John Collier called Green Thoughts, which is about a man-eating plant, but Dennis McDougall has suggested that the writer was actually inspired by Arthur C. Clarke's 1956 sci-fi story The Reluctant Orchid. This itself was inspired by the 1905 H.G. Wells story The Flowering of the Strange Orchid. It's like inspiration inception. The original film was shot on a budget of $30,000, and it went on to grow a cult following when it was included as a double feature with Mario Bava's Black Sunday and later The Last Woman on Earth. This only increased with television showings and the presence and subsequent rise to fame of a young Jack Nicholson. The off-Broadway musical was then based upon this, which is when we finally get to the subject of this week's Look Back At. David Geffen, the producer of the movie, was one of the original producers of the off-Broadway musical, and after that became successful, he planned on making a film adaptation of it. The original plan was for Steven Spielberg to co-produce with Martin Scorsese behind the camera. Scorsese actually wanted to film in 3D, which was a bit of a craze at the time, but due to legal trouble that halted the production, this fell through and Frank Oz was offered the director's chair. Originally, he rejected the opportunity but later changed his mind and did extensive rewrites and restructures to the script to make it more cinematic. The movie was entirely shot at Pinewood Studios in the UK, making use of every stage available, including the 007 stage. There were zero green screen, digital effects or optical effects used throughout the film apart from the reshot ending. Everything was shot in screen by building 6 different sizes of the Audrey 2 plant and 3 different size shops. They actually built a full-size Skid Row complete with an overhead rail track at Pinewood. As for Audrey 2 herself, she is in fact an elaborate puppet which was difficult to make look convincing, with Oz saying, "We kept trying and it didn't work." The solution to this was to shoot the puppet scenes at 12 or 16 frames per second and then playing the footage back at a normal speed of 24 frames per second. Oz said of the solution, "By slowing it down it looked like it was talking real fast. We then went, holy cow, look at that, we can do it." If human actors had to interact with the puppet, they had to mime their speech and actions in slow motion so that they too looked realistic when the footage was played back. The sound was then recorded to match this and added in post. All 6 puppets had to be repainted and cleaned after shooting every night, taking around 3 hours to do each day. Little Shop of Horrors is a rare look back at where the film was a somewhat box office hit and a massive critical success. Shot on a budget of $25 million, a record for Warner Bros. At the time, beating the $18 million for Aliens, it grossed $39 million, considered slightly underwhelming by the studio, but went on to become a massive success on home video. Critical reaction was wildly positive, with Roger Ebert summing up the consensus writing, "All of the wonders of Little Shop of Horrors are accomplished with an offhand casual charm. This is the kind of movie that cults are made of, and after Little Shop finishes its first run, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see it develop as one of those movies that fans want to include in their lives." I feel dirty. That's twice I've agreed with Ebert in a matter of weeks now, because he was spot on with this film, as it did go on to grow a cult following on home video. It is also the first movie I've taken a look back at that was nominated for an Oscar, two in fact, neither of which it won sadly. The cartoon that ran for one season of 13 episodes in 1991 is actually based on Roger Corman's The Little Shop of Horrors, and not the 1980s remake Little Shop of Horrors that I am taking a look back at today, but I love this show so wanted to mention it existed. A remake is of course in the works because Hollywood is so creatively bankrupt at this point, it would rather remake a remake than, I don't know, have an original idea.
I've never seen anything like it before.
No one has.
Where did you get it?
Having rewatched this in order to write this look back at, I have to say wow, this is the first 5-star movie I have seen this year and by far the best movie I've covered so far in this look back series. Firstly, the cast is amazing, especially Moranis and Green, who are perfectly cast as the leads. Such a shame that Moranis essentially retired from public life after his wife's tragic death from cancer in 1991 to focus on being a full-time single father. We almost didn't get Green in this movie at all, with such people as Cyndi Lauper, who turned it down, and Barbara Streisand being considered first for the role of Audrey before Green got the role that she had originated in the off-Broadway show. We get amazing cameos from John Candy, who was actually offered the role of Mushnik, but chose to take the much smaller role of the radio DJ. Steve Martin, who took 6 weeks to film his scenes and made changes to the script, such as punching the nurse in the face, and of course Bill Murray as the sadomasochistic dental patient Arthur Denton. Bill Murray actually ad-libbed his entire role. Seeing as he ad-libbed wildly different lines in each take over 2 days of filming, it was difficult to put together a coherent scene using his takes, but they somehow managed because his cameo is amazing. The dental tools that Steve Martin uses on Bill Murray actually wound their way into Tim Burton's Batman, and were used on Jack Nicholson, who making his big screen debut played the same character as Murray but under a different name in Roger Corman's version of the movie. For all the singing and weirdness that goes on in this movie, it is an obvious critique of unchecked capitalism and people who forego morals for profit. This is made entirely obvious with the first song that Audrey 2 has, with the plant promising Seymour everything he ever wanted as long as he feeds Audrey 2 meat. Human meat. But it's okay because you are morally justified in feeding it Orin because Orin is a horrible human being. In other words, killing people in the pursuit of profit is morally justifiable from a certain perspective, which is something we see play out in real life constantly. Of course, for a while Seymour does get everything he desires. He gets Audrey, he gets fame, and he gets wealth having never had anything before in his life, which brings us to the ending. Originally in the work cut, Oz had Seymour and Audrey die, but when they showed this to test audiences, in Oz's own words, for every musical number there was applause, they loved it, it was just fantastic, until Rick and Ellen died, and then the theatre became a refrigerator, an icebox. It was awful, and the cards were just awful. You have to have a 55% recommend to really be released, and we got a 13. It was a complete disaster. So of course they changed the ending, even though the ending as shot cost $5 million. In the reshot theatrical ending, Audrey 2 is destroyed and Seymour gets the girl, which is far more in line with the original film's 1950s American Dream ending, where the characters ride off to the suburbs and live happily ever after, rather than the Broadway production where they both die. I actually for the first time saw the restored ending, having only ever seen the theatrical cut, and frankly it makes far more sense with the film's overall message of voracious capitalism. You'll probably eventually get eaten. So that was Little Shop of Horrors, a film based on an off-Broadway musical, based on a film, based on a short story, based on a book by H.G. Wells that built a timeless classic that you should go out and watch right now. Next week, join me as I take a look back at Flash Gordon, A movie I think I've probably seen 50 times. Yeah, I love Brian Blessed.